This tune is an especial favorite of Mr. Joseph Young.
Well, Joe is my friend, and you leave him alone. Joe wouldn't hurt anybody.
The Hollywood promoter Max O'Hara has gone to Africa in search of his newest sensation, and what he finds is bigger than his wildest dreams. An ape named Joe, raised by a human girl that can perform for audiences back in America. While O'Hara rakes in record profits, Joe and his caretaker Jill discover that fame and fortune come at too high a cost, and as they try to convince O'Hara to let them go back home to Africa, Joe is set on a violent rampage that threatens everything. After the blockbuster success of King Kong, RKO Studios naturally wanted a follow-up in the same mold. King Kong's primary creator, Miriam C. Cooper, worked on Son of Kong and She for RKO, but both films failed to capture audiences, no doubt hindered by dramatically slashed budgets. Fed up with RKO, Cooper would leave the company to work with the likes of David O. Selznick and John Ford at their smaller companies. Meanwhile, RKO still wanted to try again, and as such, the special effects wizard behind King Kong, Willis O'Brien, was hard at work on a project called Valley of the Mists, a movie that follows the basic King Kong formula, but replaces the titular primate with a dinosaur named Guanji, which breaks loose during a show in the city and fights a bunch of escaped lions. At around this time, O'Brien first met a young, aspiring animator named Ray Harryhausen, who had been so enamored with King Kong that it pushed him into the stop-motion business with O'Brien as his personal hero. Harryhausen wouldn't immediately get a job with O'Brien, instead landing work with George Pal on his Puppetoons. On the side, Harryhausen had his own dream project called Evolution, which would eventually get his mentor's attention. Miriam C. Cooper, though, wasn't done with the giant ape genre, and he, along with his frequent collaborator Ernest Schoedsack, had an idea for a kinder, gentler beast named Joe. Before they could fully realize this project, though, they were sidetracked by a little skirmish in Eurasia called World War II, during which Cooper would be promoted to Brigadier General for the US Army, and Schoedsack would lose most of his eyesight while testing photographic equipment at high altitudes. After the war, Cooper created Argosy Productions with John Ford and mended his relationship with RKO to not only attempt a remake of 1925's Grass, but also, at long last, to get Joe on the silver screen, and he urged Schoedsack to direct, even though the director was now legally and permanently blind. RKO, now reunited with Cooper under the joint venture Arco Inc., abandoned Willis O'Brien's dinosaur picture and put him to task on Cooper's project, which would eventually be titled Mighty Joe Young. It was at this point that O'Brien, having seen some of his work on Evolution, finally hired Ray Harryhausen to assist. Ruth Rose, the wife of Ernest Schoedsack and writer of both Kong films, wrote the screenplay for Mighty Joe Young, borrowing heavily from not only King Kong, but also O'Brien's Valley of the Mists. The budget is a source of contention, but let's just say on a budget of around $1.8 million, Mighty Joe Young began production in late 1947. The female lead, the African-born and raised Jill, who in early versions of the script was a wild woman in the vein of Tarzan, is played by Terry Moore, a 19-year-old actress who had gotten her start in 1940 when she was just 10. She got the job on the heels of her performance in The Return of October, and after Mighty Joe Young, she would not only appear in George Pal's stop-motion heavy The Great Rupert, but she would also secretly marry Howard Hughes. That marriage was of dubious legality, though, and didn't stop either of them from marrying again in the years that followed. Believe it or not, Terry Moore is still acting as of the time of this recording, at the age of 95. Robert Armstrong, who plays Carl Denham in the Kong movies, returns as Max O'Hara, another stand-in for the larger-than-life Miriam Cooper. O'Hara is a bit softer and a little more heroic than Denham, but for all intents and purposes, they might as well be the same character. As for his assistant and Jill's love interest Greg, he is played by real-life Oklahoma horse wrangler Ben Johnson in what was actually his first major movie role. He had been working as a stuntman when John Ford discovered him, and he would later make a name for himself in several of John Ford's westerns, culminating in his Oscar-winning turn as Sam the Lion in Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show. Other notable actors include Frank McHugh as Wendy and James Flavin as Schultz, with a number of cameos from the great William Schallert, future Grandma Walton Ellen Corby, future Granny Moses Irene Ryan, Terry Moore's mother, the incomparable Charles Lane, the singing cowboy Kermit Maynard, Singing in the Rain's Douglas Fowley, and John Ford regular Jack Pennick. For the 10 strongmen featured in the film, they were all real-life wrestlers and weightlifters, including the one-time world heavyweight boxing champion Primo Carnera, alongside the likes of the Swedish Angel, Phil Olofsson, and Slammin' Sammy Menaker. This guy is Ian Batchelor, aka Max the Iron Man, an undefeated arm wrestler who also happened to be a bartender working just down the street from where the movie was filmed in Culver City. Aside from these scenes of the baby gorilla, which were filmed in the Belgian Congo in Africa, and most if not all of the lion footage which was filmed at the World Jungle Compound in Thousand Oaks, California, principal photography took place entirely on the Selznick lot of RKO Studios. No animals were harmed during filming, but several stuntmen were, 2 from bad falls and 2 from some light lion mauling. Cooper, who was on set every day, was unhappy with the hired background performers, complaining that they were just, quote, cheap $25 extras, unquote. Thus, they were replaced by the very same actors, only now they were paid $250. As a standard way to save a few bucks, though, a lot of props were recycled from earlier RKO films, like this ivory throne from She. Principal photography took place over 3 months, but the film had an extensive post-production where the special effects men went to work over the course of 14 months inserting all of the stop motion. The lead effects man was, of course, Willis O'Brien, who designed all of the shots and sequences, but who was so busy on technical considerations that he didn't do any of the actual animation. That was almost entirely farmed out to Ray Harryhausen, who had never worked on a feature film before, but who clearly had the skill to follow O'Brien's lead. During production, one of the film's hired grips, Pete Peterson, wriggled his way into doing some animation of his own, setting the stage for his own career in special effects. Joe is made up of several different models and armatures of various sizes, which were designed and built by Marcel Delgado and Harry Cunningham. The main one was nicknamed Jennifer by Ray Harryhausen as a nod to Jennifer Jones from Duel in the Sun. To help conquer the fur rippling of King Kong, the rabbit hair used in the past was replaced with unborn lamb hair embedded in rubber, which didn't move nearly as much. That, combined with several other technical improvements and innovations spearheaded by O'Brien, makes Mighty Joe Young a massive leap forward, far exceeding what was possible back in 1933, and earning O'Brien an Academy Award, which this time he graciously accepted. Mighty Joe Young released in July of 1949 to mixed reviews that praised the effects and humor, but still compared it unfavorably to King Kong. It was a box office disappointment as well, recording a total loss of $675,000. A planned sequel that would pair Joe with Tarzan was quietly scrapped, and Cooper would go on to do other things, namely help develop Cinerama and executive produce John Ford's The Searchers. However, Mighty Joe Young remained a landmark of effects cinema and launched one of the greatest special effects careers in all of Hollywood by showing the world what a young Ray Harryhausen could do. 2 decades later, Harryhausen, now an established name whose movies were already considered Ray Harryhausen movies, would finally succeed in bringing O'Brien's Valley of the Mists to theaters, this time under the title The Valley of Guangxi. Unfortunately, it was another box office flop, as was a big-budget remake of Mighty Joe Young in the late 90s, starring Charlize Theron and Bill Paxton. Alas, it seems Mighty Joe Young can never get out of the shadow of its big brother Kong. Kong had been designed as a horror icon first and foremost, and Cooper was initially surprised that so many people seemed to relate and sympathize with him. A naturalist in his own right, Cooper wanted to find a way to lean into that sympathy to portray a different side to the beasts of the jungle. Therefore, Joe represents something more peaceful than Kong. Still dangerous to be sure, but not a murderous kidnapping monster scaling the Empire State Building and swatting at airplanes. In the end, Joe is even an undeniable hero. But the film is about much more than that. While Joe is clearly the main draw, Ruth Rose wisely made the fish-out-of-water Jill the primary focus of the plot. She is coaxed to come to the United States by O'Hara with the promises of fame and fortune, and once there, she quickly becomes disillusioned with celebrity life and with O'Hara. And while O'Hara, who does go through his own dynamic change into helping the good guys, isn't really the villain, the main villains of the story are obviously these three drunken dickheads, he is still a bit of a snake for the first half of the movie. He exploits Jill as clearly as he exploits Joe, and that's the real subtext here. Whether you want to look at it as the subjugation of the natural world, the destruction of innocence, or the self-serving treatment of women in the entertainment industry, there are multiple ways to read the story. It might not have the archetypal power of King Kong, but Mighty Joe Young does tell its own, more sophisticated version of that story, all in a way designed to make audiences laugh instead of tremble. As a narrative, though, it does lack cohesion. For example, the introduction of the orphanage fire in the third act comes completely out of nowhere and only exists to give Joe his heroic moment. But you could argue the sloppy writing can be overlooked, given how spectacular that entire sequence is. Incidentally, this version tints that part of the movie orange, but the now-lost theatrical version actually had a two-toned red and yellow Technicolor process to highlight the flames. So now let me address the clickbait in my thumbnail. I stand by it. Mighty Joe Young, as a character, is better than King Kong, in that he has more dimension and morality. But, okay, I'll admit it, Mighty Joe Young as a movie most definitely is not. It's trying to do more and does succeed at having its own thematic depth and artistic flair, but it could never have the earth-shattering cinematic breakthrough of its spiritual predecessor. Nevertheless, if for no other reason than it passing the torch from Willis O'Brien to Ray Harryhausen, it is a classic. And if you define science fiction as loosely and as correctly as I do, so that it includes naturalism as a form of science, then Mighty Joe Young is also a sci-fi classic.
Wendy, you are looking at the new Max O'Hara. Dignified, restrained, artistic. Classy.
A nuclear blast in the frozen tundra above the Arctic Circle has released a monster from another age. But this ancient terror's only eyewitness, Professor Tom Nesbitt, is believed to be suffering from a concussion when he tries to explain what he saw. After the enormous creature begins wreaking havoc at sea and along the coast, Professor Nesbitt is finally able to assemble other witnesses and positively identify the menace as a living dinosaur called a Rhedosaurus. With the help of a respected paleontologist and his assistant, Nesbitt warns the United States military to track down and defeat the carnivorous anachronism as it slowly makes its way towards New York City. In the mid to late 1920s, a young boy named Raymond Frederick Harryhausen was absolutely fascinated by dinosaurs. He showed an aptitude for art, particularly paintings and clay sculptures, and prehistoric animals were a common subject. Already a frequent visitor to the Rancho La Brea tar pits and the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History, where he gawked at fossils and the lifelike dinosaur paintings of Charles Knight, he went to the theater and saw The Lost World, in which dinosaurs are brought to life through stop-motion animation. In 1933, he had the chance to see another movie that would leave an impression on him, King Kong. Utterly entranced by both the titular giant ape and the film's dinosaurs, he became obsessed with figuring out how it was done. He saw King Kong multiple times over the course of the summer of 1933, and through a combination of magazine articles and his father's brief discussions with low-level technical workers at RKO, Ray Harryhausen discovered the magic of stop-motion animation, of filming a scale model one frame at a time as it is carefully and slowly manipulated against a miniature background. In his teenage years, Harryhausen experimented with producing his own stop-motion animation, building models himself and filming them with a borrowed 16mm camera. When he was 18, he had the chance to show some of his work to his personal hero, Willis O'Brien, the lead special effects designer on both The Lost World and King Kong, and O'Brien told Harryhausen to take classes and hone his skills, and maybe he could make something of himself someday. Also, when he was a teenager, Harryhausen befriended the future literary giant Ray Bradbury, and the two often talked about their dreams to make it big, to maybe even grow up to make a science fiction film together about dinosaurs, bonding over their shared love of 1925's The Lost World. Bradbury could write this imagined movie, and Harryhausen could animate it. On this foundation, the two remained friends for the rest of their lives. After a couple of years of art and film courses at the University of Southern California, Harryhausen used a homemade demo reel of stop-motion dinosaurs fighting to land a job doing animation for George Pal's Puppetoons. When World War II broke out, he worked on propaganda films for the Army under Frank Capra, after which he started making short films for schools. Then, in 1949, Harryhausen was hired as an animation technician for the film Mighty Joe Young by none other than Willis O'Brien. Not content to be swallowed up by the studio system, Harryhausen took all he had learned over the years, from Pal, Capra, and O'Brien, and decided to strike out on his own. After Willis O'Brien turned down a low-budget dinosaur movie from independent film producers Jack Dietz and Hal E. Chester called The Monster from Beneath the Sea, he suggested they approach Harryhausen, who enthusiastically agreed. The Monster from Beneath the Sea was a story about a dormant dinosaur awakened by nuclear testing who begins to lay waste to civilization, and it was conceived as a combination of the big monster spectacle of King Kong with the growing nuclear panic of the day the Earth stood still. Meanwhile, as pre-production was underway, Harryhausen's old friend Ray Bradbury had a short story published in the Saturday Evening Post called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Bradbury's story was about a sea monster attacking a lighthouse. Reports vary about who first noticed the similarities between Bradbury's story and Dietz's movie, but based on the Post's illustration of an uncannily dinosaur-esque monster, Jack Dietz purchased the film rights, out of a desire to avoid a lawsuit if nothing else.
Shh! You wanna get sued?
Ray Bradbury would retitle his story The Foghorn in later publications, and Dietz's film took the title The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Thus, in a roundabout sort of way, Harryhausen began designing the effects for a dinosaur movie based on Bradbury's writing, and the childhood dream of the two Rays was realized. While Harryhausen was given unprecedented levels of freedom to design and create the effects for the film, working alone for the most part, it still needed a proper director for everything else. Dietz and Chester hired Eugène Laurier, a hard-working assistant director, production designer, and screenwriter who had worked under the likes of Jean Renoir and Charlie Chaplin, but who had yet to direct his own film. The male lead for the movie, the nuclear physicist Tom Nesbitt,
I am Mrs. Nesbitt,
is played by the Swiss actor Paul Hubschmid, credited as Paul Christian, whose thick accent would have probably precluded him from landing the lead in a proper studio film. Opposite him is Paula Raymond as the female lead, Lee Hunter. Raymond had been in a few films like Challenge of the Range and Devil's Doorway, but nothing of much note. The only really well-known actors were given more secondary roles. Cecil Kellaway, known for The Postman Always Rings Twice and The Luck of the Irish, in which he plays a leprechaun, delivers the film's most memorable performance as the enthusiastic paleontologist Dr. Thurgood Elson.
This is a great moment for me.
Who at one point remarks about the non-existence of leprechauns. And Kenneth Tobey, notable for his starring role as Captain Hendry in 1951's The Thing from Another World, plays the very similar character of Colonel Evans, who makes another wink-wink nudge-nudge joke, this time about aliens. Of course, no actor or character is as important as the titular dinosaur itself. The fictional Rhedosaurus is a four-legged carnivore with a head reminiscent of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Early versions of the animal had an armored shell and a beak-like mouth, as well as an ability to breathe fire that was nixed for budgetary reasons. Harryhausen realized it using a technique of his own design, which would come to be known as dynamation. Put simply, Dynamation is a clever mixture of rear projection, stop motion, and simple split-screen compositing. And though it didn't use any new technologies for the time period, it had a profound impact on the effects industry, allowing for the relatively seamless combination of live action with stop-motion animation. Dynamation is ultimately Ray Harryhausen's most important legacy, and it is responsible for that unique look you only seem to get from movies with Harryhausen behind the effects. The exciting climax and ending at Coney Island was imagined midway through production, and though it contained by far the trickiest effects in the whole picture, Harryhausen enjoyed every painstaking minute of its creation. Once the movie was complete, Jack Dietz showed it to Warner Brothers, who purchased it for over $400,000, which was twice the $200,000 budget. Though Dietz considered that a big win at the time, after the film was released in June of 1953, it made over $2.25 million at the domestic box office, making it Hollywood's 7th highest-grossing film that year. In retrospect, Dietz regretted letting it go for less than $500,000. Watching it nowadays, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms doesn't seem all that special. There's a long, tedious build-up to the admittedly fun climax, but most of the plot is centered on a physicist trying to convince everybody he's not insane when he says he saw a dinosaur. However, few movies can claim to be as influential as this one, as it spawned the atomic-powered giant monster craze that would dominate science fiction for several years. It inspired films like Them, It Came from Beneath the Sea, and most importantly, Godzilla. Indeed, in many ways, Eiji Tsuburaya's iconic Tokyo-stomping monster is a direct ripoff of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, complete with the fiery atomic breath that Dietz and Chester couldn't afford. And it's not just the timely relevance of the story's unique mixture of monster madness and nuclear fear that make this film so incredibly important, it's also the career-launching effects work by Ray Harryhausen. Without this movie rocketing the stop-motion animator into superstardom, we might not have his other subsequent masterpieces, films like The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Mysterious Island, Jason and the Argonauts, 1,000,000 Years BC, and of course Clash of the Titans. Harryhausen's work is a testament to the imaginative power of film. From inspiring a young boy to pursue a career animating dinosaurs for a living, to birthing a whole new genre of science fiction, film gives us joyous aspirations to attain, modern nightmares to exercise, friendship bonds to last a lifetime, and terrifying monsters to vanquish.
From Marquette, Canada today comes word of a second ship destroyed by an enormous beast, according to her captain, George LeMay. He really ought to stop smoking that stuff and try Virginia Golds, because...
If I had to pick a favorite type of movie from the 1950s, I'd probably choose the creature feature. These cheesy monster movies run the gamut from great to terrible, but even the worst ones are great fun to watch and admirable for their sometimes absurd levels of ambition on a shoestring budget. And while I could wax poetic about Godzilla or the creature from the Black Lagoon until I pass out from exhaustion, I have to admit that there is one man whose creatures helped define that era more than any other, and he's someone we've talked about before, Ray Harryhausen.
Dateline 1955, California. In the salty seas of the San Francisco Bay, the Navy has mobilized its top men to track and eliminate a monstrous Goliath from the unexplored depths of the deep ocean. This prehistoric beast is responsible for countless deaths and disappearances throughout the Pacific. But after taking on our boys in the state-of-the-art atomic submarine piloted by Commander Pete Matthews, we have mobilized our forces to take back our waters from the demon of the depths. Please evacuate the Golden Gate Bridge, stay in your homes, and stay tuned to this channel for further updates as we learn more about this deadly situation.
In the early 1950s, an up-and-coming producer from Columbia Pictures, Charles Schneer, wanted to make a monster movie. After seeing The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the same movie that went on to inspire Godzilla, he knew he wanted to work with its spectacular special effects wizard, Ray Harryhausen. Schneer's pitch was simple and to the point. A giant radioactive octopus attacks San Francisco. The young Harryhausen, whose career was really just getting started, readily agreed, thinking it would be a unique challenge for his Dynamation stop-motion technique. To be fair, the idea of a giant radioactive octopus wasn't exactly original. Roger Corman's first film as a producer, Monster from the Ocean Floor, for example, came out a year before It Came from Beneath the Sea. With Harryhausen on board, Schneer then hired George Worthing Yates, writer of the giant ant picture Them and George Pal's Conquest of Space, to pen a story around the idea. Yates worked closely with Harryhausen on the action scenes where stop motion would be used, and then wrote the rest of the picture around them. Similarly, Harryhausen put together his sequences at his workshop in Culver City, while the rest of the production took place half an hour up the road in Hollywood, under the direction of child actor turned film director Robert Gordon. With a minuscule B-movie budget of $150,000, roughly a sixth of which was devoted to Harryhausen's effects, production on It Came from Beneath the Sea began in late 1954. Harryhausen got started in August, while the film's shooting script wasn't finalized until late September, though at that point it was titled Monster Beneath the Sea. Later, Schneer, hoping to siphon off the success of 1953's It Came from Outer Space, changed the title halfway through principal photography. To play the male lead, Navy Commander Pete Matthews, they cast Kenneth Tobey, who had also appeared in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and The Thing from Another World. Indeed, with It Came from Beneath the Sea, he completed a trifecta of sorts, as he had been an Army colonel and an Air Force captain in those other films. Opposite him as the female lead, Professor Joyce, is Faith Demure, known for her role as a femme fatale in Where Danger Lives, and later earning a reputation in 50s sci-fi horror as a scream queen for her roles in This Island Earth and The Atomic Man. Rounding out the main cast is character actor Donald Curtis, as the cheekily named Dr. John Carter. The rest of the cast is made up of other relatively inexpensive character actors, like Ian Keith and Harry Lauder, while Charles Schneer himself is often credited as an extra, though I've been hard-pressed to find him anywhere in the movie. Naturally, though, the biggest star of the film was behind the camera, doing what he did best. Harryhausen took everything he had learned from his mentor, Willis O'Brien, and from his first solo non-documentary film, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and expanded on it. One of his most clever additions was the use of underwater sequences, which he accomplished using rippled glass, rear-projected water, and double-frame slow motion. Many props were purchased on the cheap, such as the ship the monster sinks, which Harryhausen found at a five-and-dime store just down the road. Due to the low budget, only one full model of the creature could be built, and so Harryhausen did as much research on cephalopods as he could. He also saved a few bucks by only giving the model 6 tentacles instead of 8, which probably would have gone unnoticed had he not spilled the beans in an interview after the film's release. He did build a few extra tentacles that stood alone, as well as a larger-scale segment of the eye that only appears in one brief scene. Outside of Harryhausen, some location shooting was done on actual submarines with a handheld camera, and though the city of San Francisco had forbidden the crew from filming at the Golden Gate Bridge, they did it anyway, guerrilla style. Much of the film was done as cheaply as humanly possible, and most scenes were subsequently filmed in only one take, to save money on film stock. The most complicated soundstage was built for the beach scenes, where, amusingly, Kenneth Tobey kept sinking into the muddy sand, at times reportedly appearing shorter than his female co-star. Of course, there's also plenty of stock footage, a cost-saving staple of the genre, and partially as a way to explain that away, director Robert Gordon decided to lend the film a newsreel-esque documentary style, something contemporary critics praised as clever. It Came from Beneath the Sea released in July of 1955 on a double bill with Creature with the Atom Brain, to middling reviews but good audience reaction. In its initial domestic run, it earned a total of $1.7 million in theater rentals, against its $150,000 budget. This certified it as a big hit, and a huge success for Charles Schneer, who would continue to work on similar B-pictures with Harryhausen for the next 3 decades, culminating in 1981's Clash of the Titans. It Came from Beneath the Sea is mostly remembered today for its iconic Golden Gate Bridge scene, but it's not usually among the first movies people talk about when they talk about Ray Harryhausen. Then again, it's really only ever mentioned as a Ray Harryhausen picture, so it certainly added to his growing career in a big way. But let me be perfectly honest with you. For most of its runtime, this is a mediocre B-movie made up almost entirely of filler scenes that don't advance the plot very much, a half-hearted love triangle between three characters who don't really have much chemistry between them, and a lot of repetitive exposition. While I wouldn't call it bad, without the last third being a showcase for Ray Harryhausen's effects, it would be an entirely forgettable bit of 50s schlock that dabbles in nuclear panic, with light echoes of the military scientific tension better explored by the likes of The Thing from Another World and The Day the Earth Stood Still. But the Harryhausen effects save it from total obscurity, raising It Came from Beneath the Sea to the level of required viewing for 50s creature feature aficionados like myself. While the general setup is practically identical to his previous The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Harryhausen does get to flex his talents, with an increased scale, some fun underwater sequences, and of course the Golden Gate Bridge scene. You can see his talent growing as he pushes the envelope, crafting more stop-motion building destruction and exploring new possibilities like the underwater action. For the sheer spectacle of it all, Harryhausen delivers the goods, and that's why It Came from Beneath the Sea should always be remembered as a sci-fi classic.
Now watch.
On the afternoon of June 24, 1947, the pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying a small plane near Mount Rainier when he saw a series of bright flashes. He then saw what he would later describe as 9 unidentified flying objects that were convex in shape, similar to crescents, moving in single file at twice the speed of sound. He would describe their movement as skipping across the atmosphere, kind of like a river rock or a teacup saucer thrown on the water. One fateful misquote later, and the phenomenon of flying saucers was born. From that day forward, and despite Arnold's insistence that the objects he saw were not actually saucer-shaped, flying saucers were sighted across the globe at an astonishing rate, and Hollywood almost immediately took notice. Starting with 1950's The Flying Saucer, they became a staple of science fiction cinema, appearing in everything from The Day the Earth Stood Still to Forbidden Planet. Around the same time, the American Marine Corps naval aviator and pulp sci-fi writer Donald Keyhoe became the first well-known researcher of the phenomenon, what would nowadays be called a ufologist. Advocating full government disclosure and cooperation, Keyhoe published a book purported to be nonfiction called The Flying Saucers Are Real, followed by another book titled Flying Saucers from Outer Space. These became the inspiration for a science fiction film shortly thereafter, with a story that involved the worst-case scenario, the idea that flying saucers have come to the Earth with destructive intent.
The noble ladies and gentlemen of science at Project Skyhook aim to send multiple communication satellites into the heavenly heights of Earth's orbit. All of their previous attempts have been thwarted, however, by unknown failures and disappearances. As they send up their 11th rocket, Brigadier General John Henley informs his daughter Carol and her new husband Russell Marvin, leaders of Project Skyhook, that the previous satellites have all fallen back to Earth. After the 11th satellite crashes not far away, an alien spacecraft lands just outside of the Skyhook base, setting off a war between the forces of planet Earth and the flying saucers.
Before we go any further, if you could please hit that like button, we can put a stop to the destructive madness of the YouTube algorithm. If you really do like this video, hit that subscribe button too. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. After the success of 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the special effects grandmaster Ray Harryhausen was introduced to producer Charles Schneer, who worked for Columbia Pictures under Sam Katzman. Harryhausen and Schneer made It Came From Beneath the Sea together, which was so successful that it would be the start of a long and fruitful partnership in which Schneer would produce nearly all of Harryhausen's subsequent films. One day, Schneer read an article in the newspaper about flying saucers, and approached Harryhausen with the idea of making a film based on the idea. Harryhausen was keen, and so they conscripted the writer Kurt Siodmak to come up with a story. Siodmak was known primarily for working on several of the Universal classic monster movies, along with B-pictures like The Magnetic Monster and Creature with the Atom Brain. He and Harryhausen developed the story together and did extensive research on the subject of UFOs, including studying Donald Keyhoe's books and even interviewing eyewitnesses like George Adamski. It was then up to George Worthing Yates and Bernard Gordon to write the screenplay, while the workhorse Fred F. Sears was tasked to direct. Bernard Gordon, however, was on the Hollywood blacklist for once being a member of the Communist Party of the United States, so he and Charles Schneer had an under-the-table arrangement whereby Gordon would write under the pseudonym Raymond T. Marcus, an actual person who was Gordon's friend, but who didn't actually work in the industry. It would take 50 years for Gordon's real name to be restored in the film's credits. Ironically, a year after Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, Gordon would help write Hellcats of the Navy, a movie notable for introducing future President Ronald Reagan to future First Lady Nancy Davis. To play the lead, Dr. Russell Marvin, they brought on Hugh Marlowe, a character actor who'd been in All About Eve and The Day the Earth Stood Still. Opposite him as Dr. Marvin's new wife, Carol, is Joan Taylor, a former member of Paramount's Golden Circle. While Marlowe does a decent job as a fairly typical scientist hero,
I must get this to a lab.
Taylor does a better job as an intelligent woman who loses her father and doesn't want to lose her husband. Granted, she isn't given much to do, but Taylor elevates a thankless role to become probably the best actor in the film. Morris Ankrum plays her father, General Hanley. Ankrum was a prolific character actor who had become most well known for his work on sci-fi B-pictures like Rocket Ship XM, Invaders from Mars, and Kronos. Major Huglin is played by Donald Curtis, who had a significant role in Harryhausen and Schneer's It Came From Beneath the Sea. The only other actor worth noting is an uncredited Paul Frees, who voices the aliens.
People of Earth, attention. This is a voice speaking to you from thousands of miles beyond your planet.
Principal photography took place over 2 weeks in September of 1955, with location shooting done in Washington, D.C., at UCLA, along Malibu Beach just outside of Ray Harryhausen's own property, and at the Hyperion Treatment Plant near Redondo Beach, where the sound of sewage moving through the various pipes was used to create the saucer sound effects. Harryhausen, as a one-man special effects department, worked the entire time behind the scenes, usually making stop-motion sequences in an abandoned store that was big enough to suit his needs. Harryhausen used saucers of various sizes, with the largest being 12 inches across, that were actually created by his father out of aluminum and wood. He often put multiple sizes of saucers in the same shot in order to create a forced perspective, and warped glass was used to create the distortion fields. A lot of simple compositing and double exposure techniques created shadows and other visual effects, including the death rays, which were created with Roman candles and sparklers, no doubt inspired by the heat rays from George Powell's War of the Worlds, which were made with welding torches. In fact, this shot of what was actually LA's City Hall exploding came directly from War of the Worlds. Stock footage was also extensively used, cleverly combined with the effects and even cleaned up frame by Harryhausen to look more natural. This wasn't too big of a deal since he was already going frame by frame to carefully paint over the wires holding his spaceships and other stop-motion materials aloft. Earth vs. the Flying Saucers released in June of 1956, to decent reviews and a good box office haul of $1.25 million in rentals. As a B picture, it had a very low budget, somewhere in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, and was aimed at general audiences. As such, it was a huge success, giving Schneer the boost he needed to get out from under Sam Katzman and create his own production company, Morningside Productions. Despite being a B picture, in the long run, Earth vs. the Flying Saucers has proven far more influential than most A pictures of the same time period. After destroying Golden Gate Bridge and It Came From Beneath the Sea, Harryhausen quickly learned the impact he could have by destroying iconic landmarks, something he did multiple times with Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, and which has become a major trope of science fiction, most notably in Independence Day, a movie to which Earth vs. the Flying Saucers shares more than just a passing resemblance. It also heavily influenced Tim Burton's Mars Attacks, which spoofs/homages a few of its scenes, and aspects of it can be seen in practically any alien invasion movie made after 1956. However, I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you it's anything but a very schlocky movie that says things like solidified electricity with a straight face.
What's it made of? We don't know exactly. Solidified electricity is the fancy name given to it by the Bureau of Standards.
The effects are fun and were no doubt impressive in their day, but it's hard to look at things like these alien costumes and not at least chuckle at the kitschiness of it all. This is a stereotypically silly 50s sci-fi romp that really shouldn't be taken seriously, despite the influence that it has had. Everything that made it unique in 1956 has been repeated so many times that it now feels like a jumble of cliches and ludicrous plot beats rather than a coherent movie of its own. Still, it's an undeniable classic that is entertaining as long as you know what you're getting into. Harryhausen might have considered it his least favorite of the films he worked on, but even he still loved it enough to fully embrace its legacy a few years back when the movie was colorized. Sure, it's cheesy, tacky, silly, and adolescent. Sure, the science is laughably bad. Sure, the costumes look ridiculous, but come on, how can you not love a movie self-aware enough to call itself Earth vs. the Flying Saucers?
Say something into the microphone.
The quality of mercy is not strained.
Regular viewers of this channel know I'm more than a little obsessed with the original 1933 King Kong, having gone on record stating it's one of the most influential movies of all time. Not only is it definitively the first blockbuster or feature the first fully scored film soundtrack, it is also a spectacle of special effects and imagination at a level previously unseen in the history of cinema. But if there's one man who can be considered King Kong's biggest fan, it wouldn't be me. Rather, it would have to be the late great Ray Harryhausen, whose childhood wonder upon seeing King Kong in theaters grew rapidly into a career as the world's only recognized visual effects auteur. Meanwhile, the 1950s birthed a plethora of giant monster movies, all of which owed their creation to the King of Skull Island, and Ray Harryhausen finally got the chance to make a movie to honor and hopefully recreate the magic of his childhood obsession.
20 million miles to Earth.
An American spacecraft has just crashed off the coast of Sicily. Fishermen drag 2 men from the wreckage before it sinks into the depths, Colonel Calder and Dr. Sharman, the latter of which dies of an unknown disease. Meanwhile, a sample container from the planet Venus washes ashore, and within is an alien egg that hatches to reveal a Venusian creature called the Ymir that grows rapidly out of control and threatens to wreak havoc on humanity.
Around the time he was working on The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, special effects Superman Ray Harryhausen wanted to go on vacation, specifically to Europe. Unable to afford such a trip, he had the bright idea to pitch a location-heavy movie set in someplace like Italy, figuring he could get his European holiday if a studio would fund it. He went through some of his old story ideas and found one called The Giant Ymir, which was about a spacecraft crashing into Lake Michigan which results in an alien creature running amok in Chicago. He scratched out Lake Michigan and Chicago in favor of the Mediterranean and Rome, and then developed the script with the help of actress/writer Charlotte Knight. They didn't base it off of King Kong as much as they ripped it off, but the project proved to be too expensive to produce at the time. So, with no studio accepting his pitch, Harryhausen filed it away and got to work on other films. Then, after the successes of It Came From Beneath the Sea and Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, both of which were produced by the duo of Charles H. Schneer and Sam Katzman, Harryhausen dusted off the giant Ymir and gave it to Schneer, hoping that the producer could find a way to cut the budget down and make it happen. Schneer had broken out on his own at this point, no longer co-producing with Sam Katzman, and after producing his first true solo production, the Ronald Reagan-led Hellcats of the Navy, he was more than happy to produce Harryhausen's new project, under the provision that it get a heavy rewrite by Bob Williams and Christopher Knopf. Though Schneer and Harryhausen would direct the location sequences in Italy, and Harryhausen would of course direct the stop-motion sequences himself, they needed another director to film the studio scenes and get the directorial credit. Therefore, Schneer turned to the man who had just directed Hellcats of the Navy, Nathan Juran, who was already well versed in the giant monster genre after The Deadly Mantis. According to Harryhausen, he had a slightly larger budget to work with, but he was even more excited to finally get his European vacation. For the lead role of Colonel Robert Calder, they cast legacy actor William Hopper, who had previously appeared in The Deadly Mantis and would, the year after 20 Million Miles to Earth, transition fully to television, where he would become best known as Paul Drake in Perry Mason. The female lead, Marissa, is played by Earth vs. the Flying Saucers veteran Joan Taylor, and though her character is contrived into the plot for a shoehorned romance that was typical for 50s B-movies, she gives arguably the best acting performance in the entire film.
Guess I've been pretty inconsiderate and self-centered. You've had a lot on your mind.
Her fellow Earth vs. the Flying Saucers co-stars, Thomas Henry and John Zaremba, also play significant characters in 20 Million Miles to Earth, Major General McIntosh and Dr. Uhl, respectively. Meanwhile, veteran Italian character actors Frank Puglia and Tito Vuolo play Dr. Leonardo and Commissioner Unte.
I intend to use every means at my disposal to destroy that creature before it kills someone.
And Doc Weaver himself, Arthur Space, plays the doomed Dr. Sharman. Little Pepe is played by a young Bart Braverman, credited as Bart Bradley, and William Woodson provides the uncredited narration for his fourth and final Harryhausen picture.
Equally unexpected was the next gigantic stride, when man moved out of his very orbit.
Finally, Ray Harryhausen himself is allegedly this background extra. Filming began in Rome in September of 1956, where only William Hopper was used from the main cast. The studio work was then done in the US in just a week and a half at the start of November, while Harryhausen put together the effects shots a month after that. For the Ymir, Harryhausen originally planned to make it a Cyclops, but discarded the idea, later using it for the seventh voyage of Sinbad. Instead, he decided he wanted to make the creature relatively human by giving it a human torso and an expressive face complete with a mustache-shaped upper lip, a facial design he had used before in his unused War of the Worlds Martian and would later use again for the Kraken in his magnum opus Clash of the Titans. During editing, they decided to remove all mentions of the creature's name, Ymir, because they were worried people would confuse it with the Arabic title, Emir. The real elephant, which Harryhausen meticulously recreates in stop motion, was supposed to be 15 feet tall to match the scale, but the only elephant the filmmakers could get their hands on was roughly only half that. So to make it appear larger, they cast a little actor to play the zookeeper. For the record, in defense of the poor Ymir, it doesn't actually kill the elephant or anybody else outside of the soldiers attacking it during the climax. Harryhausen was very careful to show all stop-motion victims breathing after the emir's attacks, and there is dialogue confirming that the farmer who gets mauled in the barn survives his injuries.
The beast must be destroyed. He has injured one man badly, and he might kill others.
20 Million Miles to Earth was released in June of 1957, and though I can't find much information about its reception, it was certainly successful enough in its initial run, and its re-release under the title The Beast from Space, to allow Harryhausen to continue his work with Charles Schneer and even Nathan Juran. The whole trio teamed up in its wake to create The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, one of Harryhausen's most successful films. Before you ask, yes, I do intend to cover Harryhausen's fantasy movies in the future, now that I've exhausted all of his science fiction. 20 Million Miles to Earth is now considered one of Harryhausen's crown jewels, if for no other reason than the Emir, who lands near the very top of many lists of best Harryhausen creatures. A colorized version was produced in 2007 that tried to realize Harryhausen's original intentions, but as colorizations go, it's not as good as the one they did for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. I love 20 Million Miles to Earth because it feels like a realization of a lifelong dream for Harryhausen, who got his start in the effects business by obsessing over King Kong. Sure, he'd gotten to work with his hero Willis O'Brien on Mighty Joe Young, itself a spiritual successor to the 1933 classic, but 20 Million Miles to Earth is the closest he ever came to remaking King Kong in all its original glory. The story is nearly identical, though it is missing Skull Island dinosaurs and a character as memorable as Carl Denham, but rather than focusing on the folly of trying to monetize nature, it's a prescient precursor to the anxieties of the space race, which launched with Sputnik a mere 4 months after the movie hit theaters.
Why is it always so costly for man to move from the present to the future?
Though the science is questionable at best, Venus is not only absolutely inhospitable, but it never gets any closer than 25 million miles, and I always get hung up on how the Emir can grow so rapidly without consuming anything but air and a bag of sulfur. It at least tries to maintain internal logic and a modicum of scientific detail better than most giant monster movies, even those made today. Therefore, in the oversaturated creature feature market of the 1950s, 20 Million Miles to Earth and the Giant Emir stand out as a singularly wonderful sci-fi classic.
The rocket, with its complement of 17 men, had landed on the planet Venus.
Venus?
The planet Venus?